for made in Montana food products? Look no further than Town and Country Foods of Dillon.
Those pesky leprechauns are at it again. This time they are hiding their loot in our motorhomes and fifth wheels. All through the month of March, purchase a pre-owned vehicle from Dream Motors for your chance at some leprechaun loot.
Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to Did You Know? And Jeremy, we keep fine-tuning Did You Know? And so I think we should just call it Did You Know? Because you and I are huge history buffs, and we keep getting attracted to different parts of southwestern Montana. And upon you had asked me, if I remembered going to Frontier Town as a kid. And that kind of led us down our history wormhole that you and I get lost in going to. And so we're spreading our branches of Did You Know, our history segments, and we're spreading them over to the Helena area. And we're going to talk about Frontier Town, because if you go back and look at the newspapers, Dillon Examiner, Dillon Tribune, the Tribune Examiner, and in that community section, which had different names, and the Jackson section, the Wisdom section, there's always mention of people, because, back in those days, they talked about, if you and Haley would make a trip, you would end up in that section talking about where you were going. And invariably, there, at least in every issue, there was one or two or more people that part of their holiday, part of their trip, was a trip to Frontier Days. Yes. So you came up, you said, let's do one on Frontier Days. And fascinating stuff. And considering this is your baby, why don't you lead us?
Well, it's kind of interesting because what got me started on this rabbit hole is I know there was a place in Montana called, I think, Mother Goose Land or something like that. And one day I was searching on Facebook, and then I found this other Facebook page, and it was called Frontier Town. And I think this Facebook page is actually maintained by relatives of John Quigley, who started Frontier Town. And then I got, I liked the page, and they're posting stuff as they're finding out information. And that's where it came back to where I was like, hey, Wally, did you ever go to Frontier Town? And you were like, well, why, yes, I did. And kind of like you said, when your neighbors are doing something or when they left, now you open up the blinds and you kind of peer out and
or look in your camera, your security camera.
And you try to figure out what they're doing. Well, like you said, back then, everybody's business was in the newspaper. It was kind of the thing to tell everybody that, you went to the newspaper, or that you went here, or so-and-so went there for the weekend. And when I started looking at Frontier Town, that's a lot of what I saw was where people had taken off for the day. And I was like, well, this is kind of odd, because I'm looking at these pictures and they're in color. They haven't been colorized. But so it must have been, it must have had a pretty good span of operation. And it actually started in the 30s, where John wanted a very rustic lodge, we'll call it that way. It wasn't what you'd think of a ski lodge now. It was pretty much a cabin, and then he had ski trails coming out of that. And this is where Frontier Town kind of got its start. And he
well, let's tell him where we're talking about.
It's on the Continental Divide, just right outside of Helena. And
on McDonald's.
Yep, McDonald Pass.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is a nasty place in the wintertime, even now.
Even now, yeah. So that, it's funny because there's lots of things that kind of ended Frontier Town, but, you think about it right now, he's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. He's 13 miles out of Helena, but just even reading now, it's private property, so you can't go visit it like a ghost town. Somebody actually owns it and lives there. But, even back then, you think about in the 30s, people were driving out in the middle of nowhere to go skiing. And we'll put pictures up behind us. We don't have any rights to these pictures, but we're just going to use them for information. We'll put them up behind us on the green screen. But, this cabin was literally just a big open cabin. And, he had a cook stove. He had a ski hill, which we'll put this picture up on the back, but you can see the ski hill here. And people were showing up to ski this. And, it did shut down for a while during World War I. Two, yeah, World War II. And then John just got this idea, this John Quigley, the guy that owned Frontier Town, that he was going to build how would you call this? A modern day fort is basically what it looked like. Because, as you would come up, there'd be a big gate. He had pine trees that he took, and he stacked them each vertical.
All by himself.
Yeah.
And he's two friends, one who was 75 and the other one was 62.
Yeah.
And he was not exactly...
No, because he was born in 1915. So he was in his 40s, 50s when he, really started putting the beans to Frontier Town. Would be a great way to talk about it. And, there's so much information. It's so hard to kind of get all this in because it's
fascinating.
It's just fascinating and crazy. So originally Frontier Town was called the Lost Cabin Ranch, and that was near Avon, Montana. And this is kind of what they say about it. Lost Cabin was a combination dude ranch, hunting lodge, and ski resort opened by John and Margaret Quigley in 1933 to 34. It was located on the Quigley's Ranch, about 15 miles north of Avon. Montana's summer activities for guests included horseback riding, fishing, hunting, and pitching in the actual ranch work. So it was kind of like a dude ranch.
Well, and in fact, if you dig a little deeper, he actually he ended up with a dude ranch too in that same area.
Yeah, and then come winter, they would turn it into a skiing and sledding topped the bill, with skiers ferried from the ranch to the slopes on a Caterpillar snow train, which was essentially a huge wooden sled pulled by a bulldozer. So they didn't even have a tow rope back then. They would just they had a bulldozer, had a sled on the back. You wanted to get to the top, the bulldozer came down, you hopped on the sled, bulldozer pulled you up to the top of the mountain. And then Lost Cabin could accommodate 8 to 10 overnight guests. Guests would arrive via rail, and then they'd be met at the stations in Helena, Avon, Deer Lodge, or Butte. Then there is also a landing field at the ranch for air charter and private planes. So this was a big deal.
Yes.
This was not like something where, it's just some guy out in the middle of nowhere with a dream that's not going anywhere, because there were movie stars that would come and stay there. So, and then there was a dining room in the lodge where wholesome, well-cooked ranch meals were served with fresh meats, poultry, eggs, vegetables, fruit, and milk, and cream plentifully provided. So that is what this Frontier Town started out as. And, again, we'll put some pictures up in the background. During World War II, again, Lost Cabin Ranch was closed. And even though he was an avid outdoorsman, John Quigley suffered from flat feet.
That's why he didn't serve in World War II.
That's probably what got him out of that, which prevented him from enlisting in the armed forces. But that didn't stop him from contributing to the war effort. In 1942, John and Margaret and sons Jack and Peter moved to South Central Washington, where John worked on construction of the Hanford Nuclear Facility. He was the superintendent, and this kind of explains where he got his drive. Because when he came back, this is when he realized that Lost Cabin Ranch was too far from a large population, and he needed better transportation, and he knew it was never going to be the dude ranch he wanted it to be. So in 1946, he purchased 40 acres of land on the eastern side of McDonald Pass from the McIntosh family of Avon, Montana. This marked the beginning of Frontier Town, which I mean, this project took up 32 years of his life, and it was still going when he died.
Yes.
You know, so in 1947 was when he went up to the new property. He literally pitched a tent up there and started work on this property. And when we say started work on this property, we're not talking about somebody that went out there and did a little bit of moving and stuff. This guy was out there with a chainsaw cutting down pine trees. He had a couple mules, and he would skid giant slabs of rock to this area. And the whole idea was, again, he was going to create Frontier Town, which was basically, if you remember the old Westerns and you'd see the forts with the trees sticking up with the sharp points, he basically lined the property like that.
Well, it's like right here.
Yeah.
December 15th, 1947. Quigley and two friends, one 65, the other 75, began cutting trees, stripping logs, and began building the town.
Yeah, and this whole town is basically built from what they took off that mountain. And
Which adds a lot of authenticity. It's not just a paper mache holiday camp.
No, so like when you look at Disneyland, you know, Disneyland is built to be an optical illusion. So when you look at the castle, it's actually built so it looks bigger than it really is. Because if you look at the castle from different angles, it's smaller and bigger. You know, and then when you go into like the Disney rides, they make great work of black light, neon paints, things like that to create this 3D. Not this guy. Everything there was real.
Well, and you look at the timeline, and we said December 15th. Well, July 1948, which is just 6 months later.
Yeah.
A saloon, a snack bar, a post office, and a few cabins were already up. And Quigley's goal to make it a rip-roaring town of frontier days. Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
He built, you know, you talk about like the snack bar, you talk about the saloon. Here's the amazing thing. The saloon had a 50-foot bar that was made out of a slab of pine, and then it had saddles that you would saddle up to the bar on. It literally had horse saddles. Well, this slab of pine, he cut by hand with a chainsaw. He didn't use a sawmill or anything like that. He laid it down, and I actually have where he talks about it here. Just give me 1 second. I'll find this, because I split the log during 20 below zero weather with a chainsaw. It took 2 days to accomplish. The bottom of the log sits on stone pillars, while the upper half is overhead, held up by log supports from the same tree. The bar top, which has a mirror-like finish from sanding and polishing, I did by hand. So you got a bar top that's got a mirror-like finish that he sanded and polished by hand to get that. You'll find 2 carvings in the bar top, the first being 2 elk fighting over the female portion of the herd. This I carved during the fall and winter of 1956, putting in more than 300 hours. The carving of a mountain lion is on the lower end of the bar in front of the saddles. 8 good riding saddles placed for bar stools.
Well, this guy was a walking miracle creative person. I mean, like you said, he did all this cut, shaped, built, but he also created the art in the bar.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, these weren't like somebody that thought they could carve, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's a pig? No, it's a bear. Okay. No, these were very detailed, very good-looking carvings, and again, we'll have some pictures up behind it. And it says, no matter which way you're traveling from Frontier Town, you had to descend a 6,000-foot mountain pass on a winding 2-lane road. So naturally, you had a drink or two. I mean, you know, calm your nerves, get a little bit of alcohol in you before you make that. The altitude helped to boost the effects of the alcohol, which added to the fun of your descent.
Well, I remember driving up there. I mean, it was for a little kid, it was hairy in the summertime, let alone what it would be like in the wintertime.
And then another thing that was really cool is they made dioramas all around the bar. And they were animated. And this was something else. Again, this guy is like just, the more you read about him, the more you're just amazed. So he killed a buffalo, skinned the buffalo, and then animated it with the skin of the buffalo. And it was actually in one of the Helena parades on a float where the buffalo was animated. So not only did he do that, but all these dioramas. So you'd have like one where it was like a wagon being chased by Indians, and it was animated. And so all these dioramas around the bar were animated.
That he did himself.
That he did himself, yeah. If you stood at the front of the bar and looked at the back bar, you would see an eagle soaring over the hills and lake and dipping down among the trees. The eagle was made by him from a small piece of aluminum foil, suspended from a silk thread and operated by a small motor countersunk in one of the ceiling logs. So he'd have an eagle that would fly around and then dip down like it was getting a fish and then go back up.
You know, I actually wish I could have appreciated all that stuff when I visited, but I visited as a kid, and that was the last thing on my mind. I remember the saddles around the bar. I remember those, but you know, my goodness, to see all that art and everything else.
And then here's some more about this art. As you look at the miniature lake amidst the snow-capped mountains, you'll see a fisherman, which he made by building a wire form, covering it with beeswax, and then carving with small knives. If you look closely, you may see tension on his line and a definite bend in his fishing pole. And this was a sparkling lake supplied with water from a mountain spring which bubbles up right in the center of it. Okay, so here's something else that's really crazy. So this diorama and this lake was built around a natural spring. So when you would ask for a glass of water, the bartenders would just turn around and dip the glass in the spring and give you natural spring water.
Oh, wow.
You can follow the water down from the rocks under a miniature bridge and finally over a waterfall between two huge boulders from where it runs outside under the floor. This spring water is ice cold, and it is used in all drinks by placing the glass under the waterfall.
Amazing.
Oh my gosh, this guy was just, I mean.
Well, and then just all the stuff that you've talked about, this was on the front page of the Sunday, June 10th, 1951 issue of the Independent Record. So this is 3 years down the line.
Yeah.
So, and the headline said it all. Frontier Town becomes cultural, recreational center.
Yeah.
Simple as that. The highlights were many, including the artwork burned into the bar surface by Quigley and the wide array of historic artifacts hanging behind the bar.
Well, and I mean, like, here's a picture of the original gate. So you'd have this gate that would open up, and again, imagine the old style forts that they would show in the Westerns, then two giant elk heads hanging off of both sides of it. I mean, what he built is like comparable to what Hollywood would build for like a Viking village or something like that. But this was just one guy and his two old friends.
Yeah.
And he was pretty old for his age, for back then.
And I'm thinking his friends, they must have been pretty talented in themselves.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
To do this.
Yep. And then John Quigley, he had a family. He married Susan Whittier in 1950. They met in 1950. Quigley and his family, he met Susan in Delray Beach, Florida in 1949 while he was recuperating from complications of a ruptured appendix. Beginning to wonder if that ruptured appendix was from hauling boulders and logs up and down the mountain.
Big logs.
Yeah. Yep. And then, I mean, it's just crazy. And then you start seeing it. And then this was something that kind of, I guess as you'd be outside of Helena and you'd be passing, he would put up roadside attractions to get people's attention so that, the kids would see him and want to start going.
Well, and then how about this? Even prior to when he had everything done, there was a 100-foot tree decorated with lights marking the entrance to Frontier Town. This was Christmas 1947, and they called it John R. Quigley's Tourist and Winter sport development during the summit of McDonald Pass, and it presented a colorful sight. This is, I'm quoting from the Independent Record, a colorful sight to motorists approaching Helena from the western slope of the Continental Divide. And once, as you mentioned, it's a quarter mile from the summit of the pass. So it's right up there in the heart of the Rockies.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because, he was kind of, for that time, I'd say he was a modern day, just lost my train of thought, the guy from the circus.
Barnum? And Bailey?
He was kind of a modern day version of that because he figured out, okay, we're out here kind of out in the middle of nowhere. How are we going to get people to hear about us? Not only was it because everybody probably went there and
there
told
was no
all their
Facebook
friends.
or
No,
Twitter.
there was nothing like that. He was a viral sensation before that was, a thing. And I think it all boiled down to he knew how to present away from there. Like his carvings he had put alongside the road. There were signs alongside the road that would act like a billboard, but it wasn't just a sheet of plywood with two logs. It was a carving of a bear climbing a tree or something like that. And again, back then you'd turn on the radio, you'd be going down the road, and that's how you knew what was coming up, is you would see these signs or these billboards. And if you saw a carving of a bear, and as a kid you're like, I want to go there.
Yeah. Well, and then he had some heavy hitters that supported him, like George Montgomery, the movie star, but then A.B. Guthrie. People remember who A.B. Guthrie was? A.B. Guthrie, Pulitzer Prize winning Montana author.
Yeah.
And he wrote The Big Sky, The Way West, and he wrote this. On a winter day in 1947, John Quigley, by strength and awkwardness and a knowledge of leverage, set a boulder on the Continental Divide just above Helena, Montana, and named it Frontier Town. That's pretty good when you have a Pulitzer Prize-winning author doing your publicity for you.
Yeah. And this was the other thing, is he also had a ton of historical artifacts. So when he wasn't working, he had an inventory of exhibits from gold samples, flake and wheat and quartz, old guns, frontier carriages, music boxes, outdated drugs, ox yokes, chamber pots, ledgers and etchings, Chinese gold scales, Indian clothing and artifact, and of all things, picnic pants.
Picnic pants?
Yeah, you had to have special pants to go on your picnic.
That's a new fashion statement.
All are of a time and place significant of the Great Plains and Northern Rocky Mountain frontier. So, it's kind of interesting because this is probably 45, 50 years past where, we kind of transitioned from the Wild West to, more of like the city type thing. Yet he was smart enough to find all this stuff while you could still find it, and he kept it all in there. So not only was Frontier a tourist attraction with like the bar, they also had a huge chapel.
And but I've got a little story on that a little later.
But it was also an amazing museum.
Well,
and another cool thing, it attracted animals. So, we have the Yellowstone Bear World, but he had his own little bear world where there were just wild bears that would roam around there that were starting to get kind of used to the people.
That's one thing I did not know.
Yep, and there is one of the frequent visitors to the site. We'll put this picture up, and it's a black bear that's standing on one of his frontier town posts. So, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, like I said, you could probably break this guy down into sections and spend an hour on each section of this guy's life.
Well, and then here's something that appeared in the Prospector, which was the Carroll College student newspaper. There was an announcement of a Frontier Town theater offering a new Carroll College summer course with 2 sessions beginning June 11th and ending on September 3rd. The curriculum being Old West melodramas, specialty acts, silent movies, group theater projects, scene construction, stage designing, and costuming. Students would appear in plays Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Some of the classes were held at Carroll and some at Frontier Town. Total cost would be $135. It was reported in a later issue that 50 students participated in the session. Transportation would be provided to and from Frontier Town from Helena. And here, get this, this goes from that other stuff. As an added incentive for students to sign up, there was recreational opportunities, including horseback riding, dude ranching, fishing, or hiking. Now, the article mentioned the uniqueness of the Frontier Town stage. Now, that's one thing we haven't mentioned. They had this pretty impressive stage. It was a revolving stage, and it was revolutionary that it was built completely around a wooden peg and was constructed entirely without the use of nails. So I'm thinking, your dad loves to build and stuff like that. Can you imagine him being fascinated watching how, and this is another Quigley project.
Yeah. Yep.
This is another Quigley project.
Yep. And, here's another thing, I'm just kind of looking through that brochure that we found, and we'll put links to this too. So if you guys want to do your own research, you can. This is the kitchen. And I mean, this kitchen, think of like the Flintstones. That's what this kitchen reminded me of. And you've got this kitchen, and it's got these giant hanging pots that look like, in like movies where you'd see the pots where they would just cook giant soups in. And it's got like lanterns hanging down, and then it's made completely out of rock. And it's got an open fire pit in it, and then I've seen other pictures where they just have like a giant chunk of beef or something that's cooking in these on a little rotisserie, and you're looking at it and it's just blows your mind. And then you see the tables around it, and the chairs and the tables are all made out of the pine trees that he cut down. The chairs are made out of pine trees. So this entire place
was built by John R. Quigley.
It was built by him, and all the stuff that was supplied from that land, probably.
Yeah. Well, and then we have the Virginia City Players.
Yep.
We have Shakespeare in the Park. There was a traveling group of Frontier Town players. They performed at the Diamond Bar Inn in Jackson. The company performed the Western melodrama, The Farmer's Daughter. So not only was Frontier Town alive and well, entertaining, feeding, and everything else, they came away from that mountaintop and they entertained around. In the May 9th, 1956 issue of the Dillon Examiner. Now, where did you have a senior trip that you went on when you were at high school here?
I don't think we had
Did you ever make it to go to Helena and go to the state capitol?
No, we didn't.
So in the 1956 issue of the Dillon Examiner, the upper grade students of the Jackson School visited Frontier Town for a school field trip. It was reported that there was nearly a foot of snow. And where it was, I can see that at Frontier Town.
Yep.
And from Frontier Town, the students completed their field trip for the Vigilante Parade in Helena, which featured 112 floats. Now, here's something Western. In the 1961 issue of the Western Montana College student newspaper, the Wescalite, it was reported that the WMC Art Club ended a day-long trip to the Helena area with a Trapper's Chicken Dinner at Frontier Town. So it goes back to you're talking about. It does. That this was not, and it was not just a place on the road to stop. It was actually a destination for a lot of people. But can you imagine? So the brochure we have was written in 1964, but can you imagine if more people would have known about what he did? how he conceived this, how he built this, it would have been even more of an attraction.
Well, and here's a bunch of like newspaper clippings, and these were from the 60s. 1962, Go Places, events listed for Helena area, Frontier Town. George Montgomery cast first character for forthcoming production Red Blizzard. Again, it was something that they were doing at Frontier Town. Cowboys Dream Town, Frontier Town. Montana's Frontier Town, fast becoming great attraction to tourists from everywhere.
Well, and then, we talked about the skiing, then they had ski runs. It was eventually kind of a ski. Well, he tried to make it a ski resort, but it didn't really work out. In 1983, now we're going back to the Carroll College student newspaper, there were now 9 miles of carefully groomed trails available at Frontier Town for cross-country skiing.
Yeah.
So this guy, his mind was whatever the people needed. He knew they needed it before they needed it.
Yeah, he did. He was very far ahead of his time, and I mean, just his work ethic. There's a picture where he's lifting 200-pound boulders by himself to put in place. Well, and I mean, and again, like we talk, they had their own chapel and their own jail. And
while we're talking about that, really quick before you go on November 15th, 1948, there was a wedding conducted by Reverend Nels H. Norbuck of the St. John's Lutheran Church. Joseph Francis and Gwendolyn Mason were united in marriage in the main room of the Frontier Town Lodge, and the newspaper says an authentic replica of the Pioneer West formed the setting for the ceremony, the first ever at the McDonald Pass Resort, owned and operated by John R. Quigley. So there's some history right there. Joseph Francis and Gwendolyn Mason, the very first couple united in marriage at Frontier Town.
And here's how they described it. The chapel is the finest building at Frontier Town and one of the most unique to be found in Montana. John constructed it, like the others, from native materials using massive logs and rocks. The pews he slabbed from very large pine trees and then shaped them by hand. The kneeling rails are hand-hewn, covered with sheepskin. The chapel is non-denominational and available for anyone for services, weddings, and baptisms. So if you want to get married, you could come to Frontier Town and get married. If you want to have a baptism, come to Frontier Town, have a baptism. Had a seating capacity of 50 people. It has a choir loft with an organ. When not in formal use, stereophonic music is often played throughout the day for those who just want to sit and meditate or just to enjoy the music. As you sit in the pews and look to the altar, you are treated to a magnificent view of the valley and surrounding Rocky Mountains through the large picture window with the cross in the center of it, made of poles which form both the inside and outside center portion of the huge picture window facing north.
Wow. Wow.
And I mean, again, we'll put up a picture of this thing. I just like looking at this. So you can see the chapel there. And that thing's going to seat 50 people. Can you imagine the size of those logs that are running for the beams?
Well, you're like your dad. You like to work with your hands and build and whatnot. So I'm thinking this is even more fascinating for you, considering that all the stuff that you do and have to go to the lumber yard and saw it and stuff like that, and the fact how he did it here.
Yeah.
Well, and he also I would say he's qualified as a master artist. Wouldn't you say so? A master builder?
I mean, he's just like, whatever he did was pretty amazing, because there's some things like, here again is this brochure we found, and here's some of John's sayings. There are thousands of questions asked at Frontier Town every year. John has stock answers to quite a few of them. When people order scotch and water or bourbon and water, called a ditch in the West, they are surprised to see their drinks filled with the little spring on the back bar. John's answer as he fills the glasses, it's the only drink in the house, we guarantee. The bar is a gigantic log split in half, weighing 6 tons
My goodness.
and containing 2,500 board feet of lumber. John says, when it wears out, I'm going to retire. When conversation turns to the early days at Frontier Town when there was only a small bar and things were tough, John says, yep, used to sell a beer and run downtown and buy a loaf of bread. When people compliment him on all the work he has done and the wonderful results, he laughs and says, it's just a pile of logs and rocks, which it is.
Well, and he liked to be, he liked to, you mentioned it earlier, he likes to give back.
Yeah.
So in 1984, there was an event, and I'm not sure if this is still going on or not. It's called the Western Rendezvous of Art. And Frontier Town was the final the final day of it. It was a weekend event. The event was recognized as one of the top art events of its kind and was sponsored by the Helena Arts Council. Frontier Town hosted the very popular Quick Draw event. And we're not talking about a shootout at high noon. Artists participating are given a designated period of time to create a work of art. Those pieces of art are later part of a live auction featuring work from Quick Draw and work completed prior to the rendezvous. So I'm thinking, you're holding this Quick Draw at Frontier Town, and you've already described, the geography of Frontier Town. Can you imagine the art that was turned out? And this, in 3 years, this Quick Draw event raised millions of dollars that went right back into the Helena community, the Arts Council, the Helena Symphony, and anything else that needed that creative knack, that needed just a little bit of push, a little bit of help financially. And John R. Quigley, once again, the Quick Draw was his idea.
Yeah.
So, and it's been used at other art shows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But he wanted it that way at his Frontier Town.
Yeah, I know in Virginia City they have a Quick Draw event every year during their artist shows.
Well, they can thank John R. Quigley for that one.
Yep. And they had their own beer. Frontier Town Home Brew was beer labeled, and it was brewed by Kessler Brewing in Helena. So they had their own beer. I mean, it's just, it's crazy to think of like everything they did. And then, the sad part is like as things go on, he got old. He ended up passing away. And then his daughter and son-in-law took it over.
Yeah, 1979 is when he passed away. And then they didn't want to handle it anymore.
No.
And I'm thinking he was an incredibly passionate person about that. His family wasn't so much.
Yeah.
They considered it more of a burden.
Yep.
And they sold it to a guy by the name of Richard Pegg in 1992. And I'm thinking, Jeremy, we're movie buffs. I'm thinking if you're going to have a movie villain who wears black, I'm thinking this is the guy that was the ultimate villain for Frontier Town, because, I mean, the bar and restaurant was closed in 1999 because of faulty sewer, and he didn't do anything. He knew it was there and didn't do anything about it.
And the sad thing is, too, is there were other people that offered to buy it. So there were probably people more qualified to buy it and keep it running. I actually found a old YouTube video that was the real estate video for it.
Wow.
So I will put a link to that as well on here. But Mr. Pegg was quite the work of art. What he basically did is I think he bought Frontier Town because he knew that everything in Frontier Town was worth a fortune. And he originally bought it for, I think it was like $190,000.
Wow.
Let me see here. Let me find it here really quickly.
Well, I know he tried to market it because in December of 1999, after they got it reopened again, he was inviting everybody to come to Frontier Town and start the new millennium with a bang. The ad invited all to come to dine and dance to the Great Divide. They even advertised that fireworks would be displayed. But sad to say, the end was near for Frontier Town. Peg struggled financially and legally.
Yep.
And Frontier Town suffered because of his ineptitude. He amplified his role as a villain by selling Quigley's Western antiques, art, and heirloom collection, which basically destroyed Frontier Town's unique personality. Thank goodness that bar weighed 6 tons, or he probably would have tried to sell that one too.
And he bought it for $190,000. And I think part of the problem and how he got it so cheap was it was actually had back due taxes on it. So I think it was like $130,000 in back due taxes. They put it up for bid. The final bid was $190,000. And after Quigley's death, okay, here we go. After Quigley's death in 1979, his family operated the popular bar, restaurant, and tourist attraction until the property was sold to Peg. He gave Quigley's wife, Susan, an undisclosed amount and signed a contract to pay her about $222,000 more. He made some payments, but ended up borrowing about $30,000 from Helena resident Gary Frederick in order to avoid foreclosure on the property. And that's what he started doing, is he started selling it off because I don't think he ever wanted to keep it up. I think he knew the stuff that was on Frontier Town was worth more money than what the actual property at that time was.
And then because of his ineptitude, financially and legally, he lost it, and it was sold in a sheriff's sale in 2001 to Tom Battershell. Now, the Battershell family knew there was no way that they were going to be able to bring Frontier Town the way it was back again. All the artifacts and everything else were sold, so that took away some of the lure of it. And so all they did was just made an effort to protect the structures, protect and maintain the structures the best as possible. And it's sad. It would be nice if we could take a trip over there and see if there's any way we could visit, what's left of Frontier Town.
Yeah, it is, because, I mean, now they say it's a private residence, and they actually, when you look up a lot of stuff on Frontier Town, they flat out tell you, they're like, please do not try to go here. It's a private residence. And right here is actually the excerpts from the 1990s sales video of it. But yeah, I'm hoping the people that bought it, what was left of it, I've hoped that they've been able to keep it up. And that's the problem too with a lot of these older buildings, is people buy them. It's a lot of money to keep them up.
Yeah.
And I could see how, especially the cost of living anymore, to keep up what was left of Frontier Town was it's probably a pretty costly penny each year.
Well, and there was one article that talked about, and maybe it was talked about the fact that Frontier Town had outlived its lure, its attraction to people. But just taking a wild guess, I'm thinking if Frontier Town was in its prime, in its prime, like right now, it would still be a very popular attraction.
Yep.
Because that old west atmosphere is probably popular now as much as, if not more than it was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things. I'm glad I got to visit Frontier Town. I wish I had better memories of it.
Yeah.
But it was quite the place. We talked to Mark Simpkins last week when we did our Engine 18, and I ran into him and I said, because he's from Helena.
Yeah.
I said, Mark, do you remember going to Frontier Day or Frontier Town? He goes, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yep. And this was something that Frontier Town had when Battershell bought it. he wanted to keep it, and get the buildings repaired and stuff, but he did sell off the liquor license. So that was something that, he was probably able to.
That's worth a lot of money.
Yeah, because they only let out so many of those in Montana and so many per each town. So, that's, yeah. And, it's sad because this guy's life work, kids want nothing to do with it. So,
we have to thank him, though.
Somebody comes along and takes advantage of them.
We have to thank him, though, for what he did, what he created. Pretty much a good example of the old-fashioned, Old West American work ethic.
Yeah.
How he built something so spectacular. He and his senior citizen buddies, did all the work themselves, and what a place they created.
Yeah, and again, he said Richard Pegg looks like the bad guy. Here's a picture of him at the auction, and kind of looks like a pirate in Ugg boots on crutches. That's the best way to describe him.
Pretty much
Yeah.
a villain then.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, just everything, just went out the window. And, it's sad. It's another one of Montana's histories that we'll never get back, kind of like the Columbia Gardens. There's always people that they want to come in, they want to preserve. But the problem with preserving history is it's a lot of money.
Yeah. And wagering a guess too, I'm going with what you said, that I don't think he wanted to preserve Frontier Town for its historic nature.
No.
He wanted to make the money off the historic artifacts that John R. Quigley had collected, and what made Frontier Town very unique.
Yeah. And some of the artifacts, I know he had Charles Russell sculptures. He had the first safe in Montana. And there was a couple other things that were like that were at Frontier Town that I'm pretty sure this guy probably sold off.
So, bottom line, as we wrap things up, thankful that I had a chance to see Frontier Town.
Envy that you had a chance.
Yes. Yeah.
I actually asked Ron next door. I told him we were going to do this. I'm like, did you ever go to Frontier Town? And kind of got a twinkle in his eye, and he goes, yeah, I remember going to Frontier Town as a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad lived in Helena, so I had the opportunity when I visited him in the summertime. Frontier Town was a nice stop every year. So this is our first step in celebrating and remembering the history of southwestern Montana. And as Jeremy said, we've spread our branches out. Southwestern Montana is a little wider than it was previously, but we've still got a lot of ground to cover.
We do.
In just our little neck of the woods. I know future Did You Know programs that we've talked about doing is one that I'm looking forward to doing. Is we're going to do one right out of the museum.
Yep.
And that's going to be a really interesting one. And if you have any ideas, there's something about southwestern Montana that you would like us to look into,
leave a comment.
Yes, both Jeremy and I are very comfortable falling in that historic rabbit hole.
Yeah, or if you have a story about Frontier Town and you want to tell it, just put it in the comments section. We'd love to hear those.
Make sure you mark like on this. And this is a podcast,
and we also do it as a video show through YouTube and Facebook. So, we'll keep putting these out.
Our mission is to educate or maybe re-educate to the glorious history of where we live.
And we're going to try to be a little bit more on a schedule. The problem is we're both being pulled in a lot of directions. And another thing is, might have some history out front this summer because they're going to tear up Idaho Street. So that might make it difficult to record. But last time they tore up Montana Street for a project like this, do you know what they found?
History?
They did. They found mammoth bones.
That's right.
Yep. So who knows? Maybe we'll find a dinosaur out front.
Never mind. Never mind. Okay, so Jeremy, once again, always have fun doing these with you.
Same here.
And I'm Wally Felt. He's Jeremy Crawford. And we'll be back next time on Did You Know?
All right. See you guys later.